my name's Arthur Thompson. I'm a linguist. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at the Department of Linguistics at the University of Hong Kong. And my research focuses mostly on how people use and learn imitation in daily life to depict things that are around us. So, for example, using hand gestures, or it could be making up new words to describe feelings or something they've heard. So first we have the Amur Munoz's game board, which is really interesting because it's around something called Morse Code, which is a code that was developed in 1836 by a man called Samuel F.B. Morse, who was originally a painter. And when he was out one day, he received word on horseback that his wife had passed away. And by the time that he was able to get home to see his wife, he found out that she was not only dead, but she had also already been buried. So he was, of course, naturally very shocked and saddened by this news, and he was driven by this event in his life to create a very efficient way to communicate. Some way that information can be transferred from one location to another very quickly despite long distances. And he came up with Morse Code, which is a way to take a written language, so like the alphabet of English, and convert it into dots and dashes. So in Munoz's Morse game board, she has a basket of dots and dashes and kind of like a grid-like table that people can come and basically arrange the dots and dashes according to a message that they want to share with another viewer. And then someone else can come and manipulate the message to tell someone something else, basically. But the history of Morse code is really interesting because, like I said, it was created to create an efficient form of communication, but also it has a history of being used to create secret or coded messages. So, for example, prisoners of war who have been held hostage. For example, Admiral Jeremiah Denton during the Vietnam War was held by the Viet Cong, and he was forced to go on camera and say that everything is all right in his prisoner of war camp. But instead, he did that, but actually he was able to blink the words torture in Morse code. And also there was another case of a prisoner of war in a Nazi concentration camp who was given the task of making tapestries, and he was actually able to use Morse code to weave a message in to kind of joke about his captors. And these days it's also being used by NASA in one of the Curiosity rover on Mars. The tire treads are designed so that when they imprint on the ground, they leave a message in Morse code. And the message is JPL, which stands for Jet Propulsion Lab, where the rover was built. And that allows NASA to look at how many times does JPL occur and calculate how far the rover has traveled. And even now, scientists are developing ways for people with motor impairments to use Morse code so that they can just do electrical pulses made of dots and dashes to convey messages and communicate with the outside world, even though they're not able to maybe move their mouth, or they're maybe only able to just bite down on their jaw and convey Morse code. So Morse code is made up, like I said, of a dot and a dash, and these actually are normally auditory. I don't know if you can hear in the background, but there's actually Morse code playing. And a dot is the most primary unit of time, and a dash is longer. It's called a dash, and it's made up of actually 3 of these dots. And what Morse actually did was he assigned an arrangement of dots and dashes to the English alphabet according to frequency. For example, E, the letter E, is the most frequent letter written down in English, so it only gets 1 dot. So it's the easiest one to do with the code. And when I say it's the easiest one to do with the code, that's because Morse code was originally just electrical pulses, so it was an on and off system. So you would press very quickly for a single dot and then hold down for a dash and release. That's all you could do. So it was quite a limited system. So actually what this game board encompasses a lot of things. It encompasses ideas of time and measuring time, but it's also taking something that normally is an auditory thing, and it's now, Munoz has made it visual, which is really interesting that she's working with different ways of code. She's taken English and she's coding it into Morse code, and now it's being coded as a visual, tactile thing that I can actually feel. And I think that's also what makes this quite poetic, is that language can appear in many different forms. And also it's playful, so I've just left the word linguistics on the board so that someone else can come and look at the code and then they can decode it. So this Morse game board is quite in contrast with coded textile matter and memory because it's not interactive. So if we look at it, it's two wall hangings that are quite imposing. If you just looked at it, you would think, oh, that's a very nice minimalist wall hanging with black and white stripes. But actually, Munoz has done the color patterning according to another code, another binary code. So unlike Morse code, which would be a dot and a dash, all of the letters are made up of dots and dashes. This one is made up of different arrangements of black and white rectangles. If we think back about tapestries in general, we might imagine scenes of battles or perhaps scenes of great medieval hunts or crusades or even Bible stories. And these are very visual, and anybody can stand in front of that tapestry and look at it and kind of understand a story or kind of see what's going on even if they don't know exactly the details. If we look at this tapestry, we don't get that at all, but there's still a message there. And what's really interesting is I find a parallel between that, this work and that idea and actually what we understand about the evolution of language. So how language originally started, the first humans to actually use language. And just one example or one thought experiment is if we think about two people washing up on an island and they have to work together to survive and they don't have a language in common, well, what are they going to do to communicate? They're probably going to use their hands, they're probably going to point, maybe they're going to use their mouth and make sounds to like imitate the sound of something falling or something like that, so that something is very obvious and very easy and very visual for the other person to get right away. Much like when we think of these tapestries, you can stand in front of them, and because it's so visual and we can see the meaning there, it's very easy to get a picture of what is trying to be conveyed. But then on these islands, if you think back to the island and people interacting, as they're talking to each other over time, these imitations become more and more succinct because they become more and more routine. People get good at them, and this becomes a system in and of itself. And then over a long period of time, it will just become a language that is almost like a code where if you don't know the language, you wouldn't be able to understand it, much unlike when it first started, where it was very visual and very easy to understand, at least in that moment. And it's kind of like if we think about the history of tapestries and then we look at this one, you see a parallel because this tapestry is very much codified. If you stand in front of it and you look at it, and it's quite intimidating, it's quite big, you might not know what it means. You might not even know that there's a meaning there, much like if someone teaches you a language and lets you in on what's going on when people are speaking another language. So I find that quite compelling about this piece, and that she was able to express it quite elegantly just with black and white and a textile. And that you know that a message is being conveyed, but you need to work at it to be able to understand what it means.